Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I will never forget the sound of my mother's laughter when I asked for my inheritance on my 30th birthday. Patricia threw her head back in the kitchen of our family home, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the bay windows. "Oh, Jimmy," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You still think that money belongs to you, sweetheart. It's gone. Every single penny. I spent it on your brother's future, on Marcus and his businesses. He actually deserved it." My heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. $5 million, gone. But then I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. "Funny thing, Mom. The bank says you only had access to interest payments, and..." The memory of that morning still burns in my chest, but to understand how we got there, I need to take you back 5 years to when everything started falling apart. I was 25 then, fresh out of art school and working at a small advertising agency in downtown Phoenix. My life was simple but good. I had my college girlfriend Sarah, a cozy apartment near the university, and dreams of maybe starting my own creative studio someday. Then Grandpa Samuel died. Samuel Harrison had built a construction empire from nothing, starting with a single bulldozer in 1952, and ending up owning half the commercial real estate developments between Phoenix and Tucson. When the lawyers read his will, I nearly fell off my chair. $5 million. To me, his eldest grandson. The catch was that I wouldn't get access until I turned 30, but the money was mine, sitting in a trust fund earning interest. My father, Richard, was battling stage 3 lung cancer at the time. The chemotherapy had turned him into a shadow of the strong, decisive man who had helped Grandpa build the family business. Dad spent most days in bed, his once powerful frame reduced to skin and bone, his thick brown hair replaced by a few wispy strands. The cancer treatments were brutal, leaving him weak and confused, struggling to make even simple decisions. That's when Mom made her move. Patricia had always been beautiful in that polished pageant queen way. She'd won Miss Arizona back in 1987, and even at 52, she maintained that same perfect appearance. Every morning she applied her makeup with precision, styled her hair into soft waves, and dressed like she was heading to a country club luncheon, even if she was just going to the grocery store. But beauty had always been her weapon, and she wielded it with surgical precision. I remember the conversation that changed everything. Dad was having one of his better days, sitting up in his leather recliner in the living room, looking out at the desert landscape he loved. Mom brought him his afternoon medications, along with a cup of chamomile tea, then settled into the chair across from him with that concerned expression she'd perfected over the years. "Richard," she said, her voice soft and caring, "I'm worried about Jimmy." Dad looked up from his tea, his eyes still sharp despite everything his body was enduring. "What about Jimmy?" "He's not ready for that kind of money, honey. $5 million. He's only 25. He's got that art degree that doesn't prepare him for financial responsibility, and you know how Sarah influences him. She's already talking about them traveling to Europe together, spending money on experiences, instead of building security." I wasn't there for that conversation, but Dad told me about it later, during one of his final lucid moments, before the cancer took him 6 months later. He explained how Mom had painted me as this irresponsible dreamer who would waste Grandpa's legacy on frivolous pursuits. She had all these examples ready, Dad whispered to me from his hospital bed. "She mentioned how you bought that expensive camera equipment for your photography hobby, how you spent money on art supplies, instead of saving, how you and Sarah were always going out to restaurants instead of cooking at home. She made it sound like you had no concept of financial responsibility. The truth was, I had been careful with money. I lived within my means, paid my bills on time, and even had a small savings account. But Mom had a way of twisting normal 25-year-old behavior into evidence of financial recklessness. I could help guide him. she had told Dad that afternoon. I could be the trustee until he proves he's ready. I could set up requirements for him to meet benchmarks that show he's developed real maturity and financial wisdom. That way Samuel's money would be protected and Jimmy would learn valuable lessons about responsibility. Dad was skeptical at first. He knew I was more responsible than Mom was giving me credit for. But she was relentless, returning to the topic every few days, always when he was at his weakest, always with new examples of my supposed immaturity. The breakthrough came when she showed him a news article about lottery winners who had lost everything within 5 years. She had highlighted quotes about young people lacking the life experience to handle sudden wealth, about how inherited money often destroyed families and relationships. I don't want that for Jimmy, she said, tears forming in her perfectly lined eyes. I want him to earn this inheritance by proving he deserves it. Isn't that what Samuel would have wanted? He built his wealth through discipline and hard work. Shouldn't Jimmy demonstrate those same qualities? Dad was getting weaker by the week. The doctors had started talking about hospice care. Making decisions had become overwhelming for him, and Mom's arguments began to sound reasonable through the haze of pain medication and exhaustion. How would it work? He asked finally. Mom was ready with a complete plan. She had researched trust law, extensively consulted with estate attorneys, and developed a comprehensive framework for testing my financial maturity. She would become the interim trustee with the power to distribute the money when she determined I had met specific criteria for responsibility. The criteria included completing financial literacy courses, maintaining steady employment for at least 2 years, demonstrating savings, discipline, achieving relationship stability, and showing commitment to family values. On the surface, these seemed like reasonable requirements that any responsible adult should meet. What I didn't know until years later was how she had timed this manipulation perfectly. She had been watching Dad's decline, waiting for the optimal moment when he would be most vulnerable to her suggestions. She had even consulted with a psychologist friend about the best approaches for influencing someone dealing with serious illness and medication effects. Dad signed the trust modification papers on a Tuesday afternoon in early October. He was so weak that day that he could barely hold the pen, but Mom guided his hand, helping him form the letters of his signature. I found out about the change 3 weeks later when Dad called me to the house for what he said was an important family discussion. "Jimmy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "your mother is going to help you with your inheritance. She's going to make sure you're ready for that responsibility before you get access to the money." I was confused, but not alarmed. I trusted Mom completely then. She was my mother, and everything she had ever done had been for my benefit, right? When she explained the new arrangement, it actually sounded reasonable. Financial education career, stability, relationship maturity. These were good things to develop. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she said, giving me one of her warm hugs that smelled like expensive perfume and hairspray. "This is just about making sure you get the most benefit from Grandpa's gift. I want you to be successful, not overwhelmed." I agreed to the arrangement without question. I was grieving my grandfather's death and worried sick about Dad's declining health. The last thing on my mind was questioning my mother's motives or reading the fine print of trust documents. That was my first mistake, but it wouldn't be my last. The next 5 years became a masterclass in psychological manipulation, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Mom had crafted her control system with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, creating layers of requirements that seemed reasonable individually but formed an impossible maze when combined. It started innocently enough. Within 2 months of Dad's death, Mom enrolled me in a financial planning course at the local community college. The course covered budgeting, investment basics, and retirement planning, all useful information for anyone managing money. I attended every session, completed all the assignments, and received a certificate of completion. "Wonderful start, Jimmy," Mom said when I showed her the certificate, "but this was just the foundation. Real financial responsibility requires much deeper understanding. She had already researched the next requirement, an advanced investment course through the University Extension Program. This one met 2 evenings per week for 16 weeks and cost $800. I paid for it myself, working extra hours at the advertising agency to cover the tuition. While I was studying portfolio theory and market analysis, Mom was implementing the relationship stability requirement. She had never liked Sarah, my college girlfriend who worked as a teacher at a local elementary school. Sarah was sweet, intelligent, and genuinely cared about me, but Mom found fault with everything about her. "She's not financially oriented," Mom would say after Sarah left following a family dinner. "Did you notice how she suggested you both take that weekend trip to San Diego instead of putting that money into savings? That's exactly the kind of influence that could undermine your financial development." Mom documented these observations in a notebook that she claimed was for tracking my progress toward trustee requirements. Every financial decision Sarah and I made together was analyzed and judged. When we split the cost of a nice dinner for my birthday, Mom recorded it as evidence of Sarah's expensive tastes. When Sarah suggested we move in together to save on rent, Mom characterized it as Sarah trying to access my future inheritance. The career requirements were equally designed for manipulation. After completing the investment course, I was excited to start building my future, but Mom had new concerns about my job at the advertising agency. "Marketing is such an unstable field," she said during one of our monthly progress meetings. "And that little agency could close any time. You need to demonstrate real career stability in a solid industry." She had researched positions that would better meet her criteria for responsible employment: insurance, sales, banking, accounting, industries she considered more stable and mature. When I expressed interest in staying in creative fields, she sighed with disappointment. "Jimmy, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're thinking like an artist instead of thinking like a businessman. Grandpa Samuel didn't build his fortune by following his artistic passions. He made smart, practical decisions." The pressure was constant but subtle. Every decision I made was evaluated against her shifting standards for maturity and responsibility. When I bought a used motorcycle to save on gas and parking costs, she recorded it as evidence of reckless behavior. When I spent money on art supplies for freelance projects, she noted it as prioritizing hobbies over financial security. Meanwhile, she was living an increasingly lavish lifestyle that I attributed to her careful management of the family finances after Dad's death. She traded her reliable Honda for a luxury BMW, joined an expensive country club, and began taking frequent spa vacations with her sister. When I asked about these expenses, she explained them as necessary investments in her mental health and social connections during her grieving process. "Managing your trust fund is stressful work, Jimmy," she said when I questioned the cost of a weekend retreat in Sedona. "I need to maintain my well-being so I can make good decisions about your future." The most insidious part of her system was how she made me complicit in my own financial imprisonment. Every few months, she would review my progress and point out areas where I was still falling short of full responsibility. The requirements kept expanding and shifting, always staying just beyond my reach. After 2 years of financial courses, she decided I needed real estate education. After achieving career stability at an insurance company job I hated, she determined I needed to demonstrate entrepreneurial skills by starting a side business. After ending my relationship with Sarah under pressure about her alleged financial influence, Mom decided I needed to prove I could maintain a stable relationship with someone more financially compatible. The breaking point came during my 3rd year under her control, when I discovered the truth about what she had been telling the bank. I had gone to First National to inquire about getting a small business loan for a photography studio, hoping to eventually leave the insurance job and return to creative work. David Martinez, one of the customer service managers, had known our family for years. During our conversation about loan requirements, he mentioned something that made my blood freeze. "It's good to see you back in town and doing better, Jimmy," he said casually while reviewing my application. "Your mother mentioned you were dealing with some personal issues overseas. We were all concerned when she told us about the substance abuse problems. I stared at him, unable to process what I had just heard. "Excuse me?" David realized immediately that he had said something wrong. His face went pale, and he started backtracking, but the damage was done. Over the next hour, I learned that Mom had been telling the bank a completely different story about my life and whereabouts. According to her version, I had moved to Europe 3 years ago to find myself, but had fallen into drug and alcohol abuse. She claimed I was in and out of rehabilitation programs, financially irresponsible due to my addictions, and unable to manage money or make rational decisions. She had provided the bank with fake addresses in Spain and Italy, claiming I was moving frequently and couldn't maintain stable housing. Every letter the bank had sent to notify me about trust fund matters had been redirected to Mom's address, with her authorization as my concerned parent dealing with my overseas crisis. Every annual statement, every notification about policy changes, every official communication about my own money had been intercepted by the woman who claimed to be protecting my financial future. David showed me the file they had built based on Mom's reports. It painted a picture of a young man so completely dysfunctional that extended trustee control was not only reasonable, but necessary for public safety. According to these records, I was exactly the kind of person who would waste $5 million on drugs and destructive behavior within months. She said you call her occasionally when you need money for treatment programs? David explained, his voice full of sympathy for what he believed was my family's tragic situation. She's been very responsible about managing the trust distributions to ensure you get help instead of funding your addictions. I sat in that bank office for 20 minutes after David finished explaining, trying to absorb the magnitude of my mother's deception. She hadn't just been controlling my access to the money. She had been systematically destroying my reputation and creating a false narrative that justified her control indefinitely. That evening, I went home to my small apartment and looked at my life with completely new eyes. Every requirement she had imposed, every course she had demanded, every relationship she had sabotaged, it had all been theater designed to keep me busy and distracted while she maintained control of my inheritance. I thought about Sarah, who had broken up with me after months of pressure and criticism from Mom about her supposed negative influence on my financial development. I thought about the insurance job that made me miserable, but met Mom's criteria for career stability. I thought about the social isolation that had developed as I focused entirely on meeting her requirements, instead of building genuine relationships and pursuing my actual interests. Most of all, I thought about Dad lying weak and vulnerable in his bed, trusting the woman he loved to protect his son's future. He had believed he was ensuring my security and success. Instead, he had handed me over to someone who saw me not as her child to nurture, but as an asset to control. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Mom immediately, I would start gathering evidence. If she wanted to play games with my life and my inheritance, I would learn to play better. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep her deception went and what she had really been doing with my money for the past 5 years. My investigation into Mom's activities started with my younger brother, Marcus. I'd always known he was her favorite, but over the past few years, the extent of his privileged position had become impossible to ignore. While I was jumping through hoops to prove my financial responsibility, Marcus seemed to have unlimited access to family resources for his various business ventures. Marcus was 3 years younger than me, with Dad's dark hair and Mom's striking blue eyes. In high school, he had been genuinely gifted. Captain of the debate team, valedictorian, full scholarship to Arizona State University for mechanical engineering. But somewhere during college, his trajectory had changed dramatically. Instead of finishing his engineering degree, Marcus had dropped out junior year to pursue what he called entrepreneurial opportunities. Mom had supported his decision, completely praising his initiative and business instincts while criticizing my lack of ambition for wanting to work in advertising. I decided to visit Marcus at his gym, the first of his 3 business ventures. Apex Fitness was located in an upscale strip mall in North Scottsdale, complete with top-of-the-line equipment, premium sound systems, and expensive interior design that screamed luxury rather than functionality. Jimmy. Marcus greeted me with genuine enthusiasm when I walked in. Despite everything, we had maintained a decent relationship, though I now suspected Mom had been working to undermine that too. Haven't seen you here before. Finally ready to get serious about fitness. I looked around the nearly empty facility. It was 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, prime workout time for people with flexible schedules. But only 3 people were using the equipment. The overhead was clearly enormous. Premium rent high-end machines that probably cost 6 figures total, and at least 4 staff members visible during what should have been a slow period. Business looks good, I said, trying to sound casual while noting the luxury details everywhere. The flooring alone must have cost $50,000, and the custom lighting system belonged in a high-end nightclub, not a neighborhood gym. Marcus beamed with pride. Mom helped me design everything. She said, if you're going to do something, do it right. No point in cutting corners when you're building a premium brand. Over the next hour, Marcus gave me the full tour while sharing his vision for the Apex Fitness empire. He planned to open 3 more locations within 18 months, then franchise the concept across Arizona and New Mexico. His enthusiasm was infectious, but his business understanding was frighteningly shallow. When I asked about membership numbers, he waved his hand dismissively. We're building brand recognition first. Profit comes later once people understand the Apex experience. How much did it cost to build out this location? Around $400,000, he said proudly. But Mom says that's just seed investment. You have to spend money to make money. $400,000. For a gym that had maybe 50 members, judging by the empty parking lot and unused equipment. I did quick math in my head. Even with premium membership fees, there was no way this place could generate enough revenue to cover rent, utilities, equipment leases, and staff salaries, much less provide return on investment. Where did the startup capital come from? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Family investors, Marcus said vaguely. Mom has connections with people who understand long-term business development. That afternoon, I visited his second venture, Copper Canyon Brewing Company. The brewery occupied a converted warehouse in an industrial district with massive steel tanks, a full commercial kitchen, and a tap room that could seat 150 people. The build-out was even more expensive than the gym, with custom woodwork, imported tile, and professional brewing equipment that represented serious investment. The tap room was completely empty except for one bartender who looked bored out of his mind. According to the chalkboard menu, they offered 12 different craft beers, all with clever names and professional branding. I ordered a flight of 4 samples and sat at the polished copper bar while trying to process what I was seeing. The beer was actually quite good. Marcus had hired experienced brewers and developed recipes that could compete with established craft breweries. But the location was wrong for foot traffic. The overhead was astronomical, and the market was already saturated with craft breweries in the Phoenix area. When Marcus arrived to check on operations, he found me nursing my second beer and staring at the empty dining room. "Slow day," I asked. "We're still building our customer base," he said, but I could hear defensiveness creeping into his voice. "The restaurant business takes time. Mom says the first 2 years are always about establishing reputation." "How much did this place cost to set up?" "About $600,000, but that includes everything. Brewing equipment, kitchen furniture, licensing, initial inventory. Mom wanted to make sure we didn't cut corners that would hurt us later." $600,000 for a brewery that appeared to be serving maybe 20 customers per day. Even with food sales and events, the numbers didn't make sense. I was looking at another massive investment that couldn't possibly generate sustainable returns. Marcus's third business was perhaps the most puzzling. Desert Social Media Solutions, a marketing agency that promised to help local businesses build their online presence. The office was located in a premium building downtown with modern furniture, multiple workstations equipped with expensive computers and software, and a conference room designed for client meetings. "This is where the real money is," Marcus explained as he showed me around the space. "Every business needs digital marketing now, and most of them don't understand how to do it properly." The office was impressive, but it was also completely empty except for Marcus and one employee who appeared to be fresh out of college. For a marketing agency, there was surprisingly little evidence of actual work being done. No client materials visible, no busy atmosphere of deadlines and projects. "How many clients do you have?" I asked. "Well, we're selective about who we work with," Marcus said. "Quality over quantity. We'd rather do excellent work for fewer clients than spread ourselves too thin." It was the same evasive language he had used about the gym and brewery. Lots of talk about quality and brand building, but no concrete numbers about actual business performance. "What did it cost to set up the agency?" "Only about $200,000 since it's mostly equipment and software licensing. Much lower overhead than the other businesses." Only $200,000, as if that was pocket change for a marketing agency with one employee and no visible client base. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to process what I had learned. Marcus was operating 3 businesses with total startup costs exceeding $1 million, none of which appeared to be generating meaningful revenue. The money had to be coming from somewhere, and given Mom's role in guiding his ventures, I was beginning to understand what she meant when she said she had spent my inheritance on Marcus's future. But there was something else troubling me about my conversations with Marcus. Despite his enthusiasm and apparent success, he seemed completely dependent on Mom's approval and guidance for every decision. He quoted her, constantly deferred to her judgment about business strategy, and seemed genuinely convinced that his ventures were successful despite obvious evidence to the contrary. I realized that Mom hadn't just stolen my money to fund Marcus's businesses. She had created a situation where Marcus was as trapped as I was, just in a different way. While I was kept financially starved and constantly jumping through hoops to prove my worthiness, Marcus was kept dependent on her continued funding and approval. Neither of us had real independence or control over our own lives. We were both pawns in whatever game Mom was playing, and I was starting to suspect that game was much bigger and more dangerous than I had imagined. The next morning, I called the family estate attorney to schedule a meeting. It was time to understand exactly what legal authority Mom actually had over my inheritance, and whether her control was as absolute as she wanted me to believe. What I learned in that meeting would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my inheritance, and the woman who had given birth to me. Harold Brennan had been the family's estate attorney for over 20 years. His office occupied the corner suite of a prestigious downtown law firm with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Phoenix skyline. Harold was a distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from decades of handling wealthy families' most sensitive matters. When I called to request a meeting about my trust fund, Harold's secretary was able to schedule an appointment for the following afternoon. I had expected it to take weeks to get on his calendar, but Harold apparently cleared time immediately when he heard my name. "Jimmy," Harold said, as he rose from behind his mahogany desk to greet me. "I've been hoping you would come see me." That was an unusual greeting for what I had expected to be a routine consultation about trust fund procedures. Harold gestured for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, then poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher on his credenza. "I need to understand something about my inheritance," I began. "My mother has been managing my trust fund for 5 years now, and I'm starting to have questions about her authority and how the money is being handled." Harold set down his water glass and studied my face carefully. "What kind of questions?" I told him about the requirements Mom had imposed, the constantly shifting criteria for proving my financial responsibility, and my recent discovery that she had been lying to the bank about my whereabouts and mental state. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, Harold was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he opened a thick file folder and removed several documents. Jimmy, I need to share some information with you that I probably should have disclosed years ago. I've been waiting for you to come see me, hoping you would start asking questions about your trust fund management. Harold explained that he had never felt comfortable with the trust modification Mom had convinced Dad to sign. The original trust document created by Grandpa Samuel was straightforward. I would receive full access to the principal and accumulated interest on my 30th birthday with no conditions or requirements beyond reaching that age. Your grandfather was very specific about his intentions, Harold said. He wanted you to have financial security and freedom, not restrictions and control. The modification your mother requested was unusual and frankly concerning. What do you mean concerning? Harold pulled out a copy of the modification document and pointed to specific clauses. Your mother's authority as trustee is much more limited than she has led you to believe. She has discretion over distributing interest payments and modest administrative fees, but she has no legal right to spend the principal amount for any purpose. Every dollar of the original $5 million plus growth from investments should still be intact. I felt my stomach drop. But she told me she spent it on Marcus's businesses. If that's true, then she has committed serious financial crimes, Harold said grimly. Theft, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly fraud depending on how she documented the transactions. Harold opened another file and showed me quarterly reports that the trust was legally required to provide to beneficiaries. I had never seen any of these documents. Mom had been intercepting all official communications and providing me with her own informal updates about my progress toward meeting her requirements. According to these reports, the trust balance has actually grown to over $6.2 million through investment returns, Harold said. But there have been some unusual disbursements that concern me. He showed me a series of withdrawals over the past 3 years, each labeled as beneficiary education and support services. The amounts ranged from $20,000 to $50,000, and they totaled nearly $800,000. These disbursements were authorized by your mother as necessary expenses for your financial education and personal development. But they're much larger than anything contemplated in the trust modification. I studied the dates and amounts, trying to correlate them with Marcus's business ventures. The timing matched almost perfectly with his major investments: the gym build-out, the brewery launch, the marketing agency setup. Harold, I need to ask you something directly. Do you think my mother has been stealing from my trust fund? Harold removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking older than his 60-some years. Jimmy, I've been practicing estate law for 30 years, and I've seen every kind of family financial dispute you can imagine. What your mother has done goes beyond normal trustee overreach. I believe she has been systematically violating her fiduciary duties and possibly committing criminal fraud. Why didn't you do something about it sooner? I tried, Harold said, his voice heavy with regret. I sent multiple letters requesting detailed accounting of the trust expenses. I asked for documentation of the educational services and personal development programs that supposedly justified the large disbursements. I even suggested an independent audit of the trust management. Harold showed me copies of letters he had sent to Mom over the past 2 years, each more insistent than the last, about the need for transparency and proper documentation. Mom had responded to each inquiry with vague explanations and promises to provide detailed accounting that never materialized. The problem is that without cooperation from the trustee or a complaint from the beneficiary, my options were limited. I couldn't go to the authorities based on suspicion alone, and I couldn't force your mother to provide documentation she didn't want to share. What about the other family accounts? I asked, remembering Mom's role in managing various family finances after Dad's death. Harold's expression grew even more serious. I'm glad you asked about that. Your mother has been serving as executor of your father's estate and guardian of several other family accounts. I've had concerns about those arrangements as well. He opened yet another file folder. This one containing documents related to Dad's estate, Grandma Harrison's medical care account, and college savings funds for my young cousins Emma and Tyler. Your father's estate should have been settled within 18 months of his death, but your mother has continued to request extensions and delays. She claims the real estate holdings are difficult to value and sell, but I've been tracking the properties, and several should have been liquidated years ago. Harold showed me property records indicating that several of Dad's commercial buildings had been sold, but the proceeds had not been distributed to beneficiaries, according to the will. Instead, the money appeared to be sitting in accounts controlled by Mom, earning minimal interest while she claimed to be negotiating better sale prices for remaining properties. What about Grandma's account? Your grandmother's nursing care fund was set up with about $300,000 to ensure she receives proper medical attention for the rest of her life. Your mother has been managing those funds and providing quarterly reports on medical expenses. But when I tried to verify the expenses with the nursing facility, they told me they hadn't received payments for several months and were considering transferring your grandmother to a less expensive facility. The room felt like it was spinning. Mom had been stealing from Grandma's medical care fund, leaving an 87-year-old woman vulnerable to losing her quality health care because of unpaid bills. And Emma and Tyler's college funds, those accounts were set up by your father and grandfather to ensure both children could attend college without financial stress. The accounts should have about $75,000 each by now, but according to the last statements I received, they're nearly empty. Your mother claims the money was transferred to higher-yield investment vehicles, but she hasn't provided documentation of these new investments. Harold leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a combination of sympathy and determination. Jimmy, your mother hasn't just been mismanaging your trust fund. She has been systematically stealing from multiple family accounts, potentially endangering your grandmother's health care and destroying your cousin's educational opportunities. This is much bigger than one woman overstepping her authority as a trustee. How much money are we talking about total? Harold consulted his notes and did quick calculations on his calculator. Based on what should be in all the accounts she controls, we're looking at potential theft exceeding $2 million. That's in addition to the improper disbursements from your trust fund. I sat in shocked silence, trying to process the magnitude of Mom's criminal activity. She hadn't just been controlling my life and stealing my inheritance. She had been systematically robbing our entire family while presenting herself as the responsible caretaker of everyone's financial welfare. Harold, what would you need to build a case against her? Bank records documentation of the actual expenses versus what she claimed evidence of where the missing money went, and preferably testimony from someone who witnessed her making false statements about the accounts. I thought about my conversations with Marcus at his various businesses, his casual mentions of Mom's guidance and financial support, and David's inadvertent revelation about the lies Mom had been telling the bank about my supposed overseas problems. I think I can get you that evidence, I said. But I'm going to need time to gather it properly, and I'll need your help to make sure we do this right. Harold smiled for the first time since our conversation began. Jimmy, I've been waiting 5 years to help you reclaim your inheritance and hold your mother accountable for her actions. Whatever you need, you have my full support. As I left Harold's office that afternoon, I realized that Mom's control over my life was about to come to an end. But I also understood that confronting her would require careful planning and irrefutable evidence. She had spent 5 years building her web of deception and financial manipulation. Dismantling it would take patient strategy and perfect execution. The next 6 months would be the most challenging of my life, but also the most important. It was time to stop being Mom's victim and start being the man Dad and Grandpa had raised me to become. The 6 months following my meeting with Harold were the most difficult and transformative of my life. Every day I had to pretend that nothing had changed, that I still believed Mom's lies about my inheritance and still accepted her authority over my financial future. Meanwhile, I was methodically building the evidence that would destroy her elaborate deception and potentially send her to prison. Harold connected me with a private investigator named Catherine Walsh, a former FBI financial crime specialist who now worked independently on complex fraud cases. Catherine was a sharp woman in her 40s who understood exactly how to document financial crimes without alerting the perpetrator. The key is patience. Catherine explained during our first meeting at a coffee shop far from any place Mom might visit. Your mother has been careful to create plausible explanations for her activities. We need to prove intent to defraud, not just poor financial management. Catherine helped me develop a comprehensive plan for gathering evidence. First, we would document all of Mom's false statements about my whereabouts and mental state. Second, we would trace the flow of money from my trust fund to Marcus's businesses. Third, we would verify the status of all family accounts Mom was supposedly managing responsibly. The hardest part was maintaining normal family relationships while secretly recording conversations and copying documents. I started visiting Mom regularly, ostensibly, to discuss my continued progress toward meeting her requirements for trust fund access. During these visits, I would guide conversations toward topics that would elicit incriminating statements. I've been thinking about what you said about spending the inheritance on Marcus's future, I said during one afternoon coffee session at her kitchen table. Can you help me understand how that worked exactly? Mom was always happy to discuss her financial wisdom and protective instincts. Jimmy Marcus needed capital for his businesses, and I could see that he was ready for that responsibility in a way that you weren't at the time. I used my authority as trustee to make strategic investments in his ventures. Technically, you're a silent partner in all his businesses now. That statement alone was enough to prove breach of fiduciary duty, since trustees have no authority to invest trust assets in high-risk private businesses without explicit beneficiary consent. But I pressed for more details. So legally, I own part of the gym and brewery. Well, it's complicated, Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. I structured the investments as loans that will be repaid to the trust fund once the businesses become profitable. But yes, you have equity positions that will provide much better returns than just letting money sit in conservative investments. Another provable violation: trustees cannot make unsecured loans to third parties using trust assets, especially not to family members for speculative business ventures. Meanwhile, Catherine was working with David at the bank to document the false information Mom had provided about my overseas residence and substance abuse problems. David was initially reluctant to cooperate, worried about bank privacy policies and potential liability. But when Harold explained the criminal nature of Mom's deception, David agreed to provide carefully documented testimony about the lies Mom had told to justify her extended control over my trust fund. The most emotionally difficult part of the investigation was uncovering what Mom had done to Grandma Harrison. Catherine and I visited the nursing facility where Grandma had lived for the past 4 years, supposedly receiving premium care, funded by the special account Dad had established. We haven't received payment for Mrs. Harrison's care in over 8 months, the facility director told us. We've been sending bills to Mrs. Patricia Harrison, but she keeps promising that insurance issues are being resolved. We've been allowing Mrs. Harrison to remain here out of compassion, but we're going to have to transfer her to a Medicaid facility soon if the situation isn't resolved. Grandma's room was on the memory care unit since she was dealing with advanced Alzheimer's disease. When we visited, she was sitting in a basic wheelchair wearing clothes that were obviously too large for her diminishing frame. The private room and specialized care that Mom claimed to be funding were nowhere in evidence. The family was paying for private nursing assistants and premium meal plans, the director explained, but those services were discontinued when payments stopped. Mrs. Harrison is receiving the standard level of care now, which is adequate but much more limited. Catherine discreetly photographed Grandma's current living conditions and obtained copies of the unpaid bills that Mom had been ignoring. The total amount owed was over $60,000, and the facility was legally required to transfer Grandma to a lower-cost Medicaid-funded facility within 30 days, if payment wasn't received. I spent an hour sitting with Grandma holding her hand and telling her about my life, though I wasn't sure how much she understood. She had been such a vibrant, intelligent woman during my childhood, always ready with homemade cookies and stories about Grandpa's early business adventures. Seeing her reduced to this basic level of institutional care because Mom had stolen her medical fund was heartbreaking and infuriating. The investigation into Emma and Tyler's college funds revealed yet another layer of Mom's deception. The accounts had indeed been emptied, with Mom claiming the money had been moved to higher yield investment vehicles managed by a sophisticated financial firm. When Catherine tried to verify these investments, we discovered that the firm Mom had named didn't exist. She created fake investment statements, Catherine explained after spending days trying to trace the supposed transfers. Professional-looking documents with letterhead and account numbers, but the company is completely fictional. The money was transferred to personal accounts that she controls. Emma was now 16, and Tyler, 14, both excellent students who had been counting on their college funds to attend good universities. Their parents, my Uncle Robert and Aunt Jennifer, had been trusting Mom's regular reports about growing account balances and investment performance. They had no idea their children's educational futures had been stolen to fund Marcus's failing businesses and Mom's luxury lifestyle. The evidence we gathered over 6 months was overwhelming. Bank records showing transfers from my trust fund to Marcus's business accounts. Recorded conversations where Mom admitted to spending my inheritance on investments she had no authority to make. Documentation of her lies to financial institutions about my mental state and whereabouts. Proof that she had stolen from Grandma's medical care fund and my cousin's college savings. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Marcus himself. During one of my visits to his brewery, I casually asked about his business loan payments and whether he was on track to repay the family investors Mom had mentioned. "Oh, I'm not paying those back," Marcus said with a laugh. "Mom explained that the money came from your trust fund, and since we're brothers, it's really like family money anyway. She said you'd rather see the money invested in something productive than just sitting in an account earning nothing." I kept my expression neutral while my internal recorder captured every word. "So you know the money came from my inheritance?" "Sure, but Mom says you'll get it back when the businesses go public or get acquired. It's actually better for you this way, because you'll get much higher returns than if the money was just sitting in boring investments." Marcus genuinely believed he was helping me by spending my inheritance on businesses that were obviously losing money every month. Mom had convinced him that taking my money without my knowledge or consent was actually an act of brotherly generosity. That conversation finally gave us proof of intent to defraud. Mom had knowingly used trust assets for unauthorized investments while lying to both the beneficiary and the supposed borrower about the legal status of the transactions. By early November, Catherine and Harold had assembled a case file that could support criminal charges for trust fund fraud, elder abuse, and theft. We had enough evidence to recover the stolen money and hold Mom accountable for her crimes. But I wanted something more than just legal victory. I wanted Mom to understand that her years of manipulation and control were ending, and I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions with full knowledge of how completely her deception had been exposed. I decided to confront her on my 30th birthday, the day I was legally entitled to full access to my inheritance regardless of her artificial requirements. It would be poetic justice to use the date she had been dreading as the moment when her carefully constructed lies finally collapsed. The confrontation would require perfect timing and flawless execution. But after 6 months of playing her game, while secretly building an ironclad case against her, I was ready to show Mom exactly what kind of man she had underestimated. My 30th birthday fell on a Saturday in early December. I had spent weeks planning every detail of the confrontation, working with Harold and Catherine to ensure we had irrefutable evidence and proper legal representation for what was essentially going to be a criminal confession under controlled circumstances. Harold had arranged for us to meet at his office rather than at Mom's house. The setting was important. Mom needed to understand immediately that this was a legal proceeding, not a family discussion. Catherine had prepared comprehensive files documenting every aspect of Mom's financial crimes. David from the bank had agreed to be present as a witness to provide testimony about her false statements. Detective Rebecca Stone from the Phoenix Police Department Financial Crimes Unit was standing by to make arrests if necessary. I called Mom on Friday afternoon to set up the meeting. "Tomorrow's the big day," I said, keeping my voice casual and hopeful. "My 30th birthday, I'd like to meet with you and Harold to finally get access to my trust fund." Mom's voice carried that familiar tone of patient condescension that I now recognized as calculated, psychological manipulation. "Oh, sweetie, we've talked about this. Age 30 was just a target date, not an absolute requirement. You still have some development goals to meet before you're really ready for that responsibility." "What kind of goals?" I asked, genuinely curious about what new requirements she had invented to maintain control. "Well, you need to demonstrate more career stability. That insurance job is fine for now, but you haven't shown real advancement or leadership potential. And you're still single, which suggests you haven't developed the emotional maturity needed for major financial decisions." I marveled at her ability to create new obstacles on demand. After 5 years of jumping through her hoops, she was still finding reasons to delay my access to my own inheritance. "I'd really like to discuss this with Harold present," I said. "Maybe he can help clarify what the trust document actually requires." Mom agreed reluctantly to the meeting, probably assuming she could continue to manipulate the situation with Harold's help. She had no idea that Harold had been documenting her violations for years and was eager to help expose her crimes. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear with desert sunshine streaming through the windows of Harold's conference room. I arrived first, followed by Catherine and David. Detective Stone remained in an adjacent office ready to join us when the evidence had been presented. Mom arrived exactly on time, dressed in one of her elegant business suits and carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained more fabricated requirements and false documentation. She greeted everyone professionally, clearly expecting to maintain her authority over the proceedings. "I've prepared some additional assessments for Jimmy," she announced, opening her portfolio and removing several official-looking documents. "I want to make sure he's truly ready for the responsibility before we make any irreversible decisions." Harold gestured for everyone to take seats around the polished conference table. "Patricia, before we discuss additional requirements, I need to review some irregularities I've discovered in the trust fund management." Mom's confident expression flickered slightly. "What kind of irregularities?" Harold opened the first evidence file and spread bank statements across the table. "Over the past 3 years, there have been substantial disbursements from Jimmy's trust fund that appear to violate your authority as trustee. Can you explain these transactions?" Mom glanced at the documents and immediately shifted into defensive mode. "Those are educational investments in Jimmy's future. I used my discretion to fund business opportunities that would provide him with valuable experience and superior returns. The disbursements total nearly $800,000, Harold continued. They were transferred to accounts controlled by Marcus for business ventures that have no legal connection to Jimmy's trust fund. Can you provide documentation showing these transfers were legally authorized?" "I don't appreciate your tone, Harold," Mom said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "I've been protecting Jimmy's interests while he develops the maturity needed to handle significant wealth responsibly. Every decision I've made has been for his benefit." That's when I decided to drop the first bombshell. "Mom, I've been living in Phoenix for the past 5 years, I said quietly. "I've never traveled overseas, and I've never had substance abuse problems. Why did you tell the bank I was living in Europe and dealing with addiction issues?" The color drained from Mom's face. She looked at David, who nodded grimly to confirm that her lies had been exposed. I was protecting your privacy," she stammered. "You were going through a difficult period, and I didn't want your personal struggles to become public knowledge." Catherine opened her evidence file and placed a series of recorded conversation transcripts on the table. Mrs. Harrison, we have documented recordings of you admitting to spending trust fund money on Marcus's businesses without beneficiary consent. We also have evidence that you've been stealing from other family accounts, including your mother-in-law's medical care fund and your niece and nephew's college savings. Mom's professional facade began to crumble. Her hands were shaking as she realized the magnitude of evidence arrayed against her. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've been managing family finances responsibly for years. Every decision I've made has been in everyone's best interests." Harold placed copies of the unpaid bills from Grandma's nursing facility on the table. "Your mother-in-law is about to be transferred to a Medicaid facility because you haven't paid her care bills in over 8 months. Where did her medical fund money go?" "There were cash flow issues," Mom said weakly. "I was waiting for some investments to mature before making the payments." "What investments?" Catherine asked. "We've traced all the transfers from Mrs. Harrison's account. The money was moved to your personal accounts and used for luxury purchases and travel expenses. That's when something extraordinary happened. The mask that Mom had worn for 30 years completely fell away, and I saw the real person underneath for the first time in my life. You want to know the truth?" She said, her voice suddenly cold and harsh. "Fine. I never wanted children. I married Richard for his money and his family's social status, not because I loved him or wanted to be a mother." The room fell silent except for the sound of Catherine's recorder capturing every word. "Jimmy, you were an accident that complicated my life from the moment you were conceived. You represented 18 years of obligations and expenses that I never chose. When Samuel died and left you that money, I saw an opportunity to finally get compensation for the years I wasted raising you instead of enjoying my life. I felt like I was watching a stranger reveal herself for the first time. This wasn't my mother speaking. This was someone who had been acting a role for 3 decades. Marcus was supposed to be my insurance policy." She continued, her voice getting stronger as she abandoned all pretense. "A child I could control and manipulate to support me in my old age. I spent your money training him to be dependent on me, just like I kept you jumping through hoops to maintain control over your inheritance." She turned to look directly at me, her eyes filled with something that looked like relief at finally dropping the maternal persona. "I've been planning to disappear with whatever money I could steal for over 2 years now. I have a condo in Costa Rica, offshore bank accounts, and a new identity all set up. I was going to take everything and leave you and Marcus to figure out the mess I left behind." Harold was writing frantically, documenting every admission. Catherine's recorder captured each word of Mom's confession. David sat in shocked silence, finally understanding the full scope of the deception he had unknowingly enabled. "The only thing I regret," Mom said, standing up from the table, "is that I didn't take more. Your grandfather's money should have been mine by right of marriage. I earned it by putting up with his arrogant son and pretending to love his spoiled grandchildren for 30 years. That's when Detective Stone entered the room, having heard enough to justify immediate arrest. "Patricia Harrison," Detective Stone said, approaching with handcuffs ready, "You're under arrest for trust fund fraud, elder financial abuse, and theft of family assets." As the detective read Mom her rights, she looked at me one final time with an expression of pure contempt. "You think you've won something here, Jimmy. You have no idea how to handle real money or make difficult decisions. You'll waste every penny of that inheritance within 5 years, just like I always knew you would." Those were the last words my mother ever spoke to me. The legal proceedings that followed Mom's arrest moved faster than anyone expected. With her recorded confession and the overwhelming evidence Catherine had gathered, the prosecutor's office was able to build an airtight case that left no room for plea bargaining or reduced charges. Mom was formally charged with 15 counts of financial fraud, including trust fund theft, elder abuse for stealing Grandma's medical funds, and wire fraud for the fake investment documents she had created for Emma and Tyler's college accounts. The total amount of stolen money exceeded $2.4 million when all accounts were thoroughly audited. During the court proceedings, we learned even more disturbing details about Mom's deception. She had indeed purchased a luxury condo in Costa Rica using stolen money, and she had been systematically moving assets to offshore accounts for over 18 months. If we hadn't exposed her crimes when we did, she would have successfully disappeared with nearly everything, leaving our entire family financially devastated. The judge sentenced Mom to 12 years in federal prison with requirements that she make full restitution to all victims before becoming eligible for parole. Her Costa Rica property was seized and sold along with her BMW jewelry and other luxury items purchased with stolen funds. More importantly for our family's healing, the court ordered immediate restoration of all stolen assets to their proper accounts. My trust fund balance was fully restored to $6.2 million, including investment growth that had continued throughout Mom's period of unauthorized control. Grandma's medical care account was replenished, ensuring she could return to premium care at the nursing facility. Emma and Tyler's college funds were restored with additional compensation for lost investment opportunities. The most challenging part of the aftermath was rebuilding my relationship with Marcus. Initially, he was angry and defensive, unable to accept that his beloved mother had been manipulating him as ruthlessly as she had controlled me. He felt betrayed, not just by Mom's lies, but by my investigation and the resulting destruction of the businesses he had worked so hard to build. "You destroyed everything I worked for," he said during our first conversation after Mom's sentencing. "Those businesses were my future, my chance to build something meaningful." I understood his anger, but I also needed him to understand the reality of what Mom had done to both of us. "Marcus, your businesses were funded with stolen money. They weren't profitable, and they never could have been with the overhead Mom encouraged you to take on. She set you up to fail while making you completely dependent on her continued funding." Over several months of difficult conversations, Marcus gradually came to understand how thoroughly Mom had manipulated both our lives. She had kept me financially starved and constantly jumping through arbitrary hoops while making him financially dependent on stolen money and her continued approval. The hardest revelation for Marcus was learning that Mom had never intended for his businesses to succeed. She had deliberately encouraged expensive build-outs and poor location choices because she wanted him to remain dependent on her funding rather than developing genuine independence and business skills. She told me that family money should stay in the family, Marcus said during one of our healing conversations. "She made me feel like I was helping you by using your inheritance for investments that would benefit us both." Marcus made the difficult decision to close all 3 businesses and return to college to finish his engineering degree. I used a portion of my recovered inheritance to pay for his tuition and living expenses, not as a loan or investment, but as a gift between brothers who were finally free to build a genuine relationship without their mother's manipulation. The most emotionally healing part of the aftermath was seeing Grandma Harrison return to quality care. With her medical fund restored and properly managed by a professional trustee, she was able to move back to a premium private room with specialized nursing assistants and engaging activities designed for dementia patients. Though her Alzheimer's disease prevented her from fully understanding what had happened, she seemed more comfortable and peaceful in her improved environment. I visited her regularly, not because I felt obligated to do so, but because spending time with her helped me remember what genuine family love looked like. Emma and Tyler, now 17 and 15, were able to resume planning for college, with the security of knowing their educational funds were intact and growing. Their parents, Uncle Robert and Aunt Jennifer, had been devastated to learn how completely they had been deceived about their children's financial security. Patricia always seemed so responsible and knowledgeable about financial management, Aunt Jennifer told me. We never thought to question her reports or verify the account balances independently. With my inheritance finally under my control, I was able to make choices based on my actual values and interests rather than arbitrary requirements designed to maintain someone else's power over my life. I left the insurance job that had made me miserable for 3 years and returned to creative work, starting a marketing and design studio that combined my artistic background with practical business skills. More importantly, I used a significant portion of my inheritance to establish the Harrison Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping young adults recognize and escape financial abuse by family members or romantic partners. The foundation provides legal resources, financial counseling, and support services for people who find themselves trapped in situations similar to what I experienced. Working with financial abuse survivors has shown me how common these situations actually are, especially when the abuser is a trusted family member who gradually escalates their control over time. Many victims don't recognize the manipulation because it develops slowly and is presented as protection or guidance rather than control. The foundation has helped over 200 people in its first 3 years of operation, and the work has given my difficult experience with Mom a meaningful purpose. Turning my painful journey into resources for others has been more healing than any therapy or counseling could provide. I also reconnected with Sarah, my college girlfriend, whose relationship with me, Mom, had systematically undermined during the trust fund years. Sarah was now teaching 4th grade and had remained single, focusing on her career and personal growth rather than dating after our difficult breakup. I never understood why you suddenly became so concerned about my supposed financial influence, she told me when I explained what had really happened during those years. You started analyzing every purchase and questioning every decision we made together. It felt like you didn't trust me anymore. Sarah and I have been rebuilding our relationship, slowly taking time to rediscover each other as adults who are free to make genuine choices about our lives and futures. We're engaged now, planning a wedding that will celebrate love and partnership rather than checking boxes on someone else's list of requirements for relationship stability. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own judgment about financial decisions, relationships, and life choices. For 5 years, Mom had convinced me that I lacked the maturity and wisdom needed to handle money or make important decisions. Recovering my inheritance and building a successful business and meaningful relationship proved that her assessments of my capabilities had been deliberately false. The final piece of healing came when I visited Dad's grave on the anniversary of his death. I brought flowers and spent an hour telling him about everything that had happened since Mom's arrest. I wanted him to know that his intention to provide me with security and opportunity had ultimately been fulfilled, despite Mom's betrayal of his trust. I hope I'm becoming the kind of man you and Grandpa Samuel raised me to be, I said, sitting beside his headstone in the desert cemetery where our family had buried 3 generations. I'm using the inheritance to build something meaningful and help other people just like Grandpa did with his business success. I realized that true wealth isn't about having money that controls you or makes you dependent on someone else's approval. Real financial security comes from having resources that liberate you to become your authentic self, pursue meaningful work, and help others do the same. My mother spent 30 years pretending to love her family while secretly resenting us and stealing from us. But her betrayal ultimately led to a deeper understanding of what genuine family relationships can look like when they're based on love and respect rather than manipulation and control. Marcus and I have built a stronger brotherhood than we ever had during childhood. Sarah and I have developed a partnership based on mutual trust and shared values. Grandma receives the care she deserves in dignity and comfort. Emma and Tyler can pursue their educational dreams without financial stress. Most importantly, I've learned that surviving betrayal by someone you trust completely can make you stronger and more compassionate if you choose to use the experience for growth and service to others. Mom intended to destroy my independence and steal my future. Instead, her crimes led me to discover resilience, purpose, and genuine relationships that she could never understand or appreciate. The money Mom tried so hard to steal has been invested wisely and continues to grow, providing security for my family and resources for the Foundation's important work. But the real inheritance I received from surviving her manipulation was much more valuable than any financial asset: the knowledge that I can trust my own judgment, the confidence to make meaningful choices about my life, and the wisdom to recognize authentic love when I find it. If you've ever felt like someone in your family or relationship was controlling your finances or making you question your own judgment about money and major life decisions, I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not powerless. Trust your instincts, seek professional help from attorneys or financial advisors who aren't connected to the person controlling you, and remember that people who truly love you want to see you succeed and become independent, not remain dependent on their approval. What experiences have you had with family members or partners who tried to control your financial decisions? Have you ever felt like someone was using money or financial security to manipulate your choices about career, relationships, or life goals? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and please hit that like button if this story helped you think about financial independence in a new way. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and building genuine success, and share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember that your financial future belongs to you, and you have the power to make choices that honor your own values and dreams. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it gives you courage to pursue the authentic, independent life you deserve.